Welcome to Secrets from the Scene, a show for local musicians who want to improve their music, grow their audience, and learn about Minnesota's music scene. If you're interested in talking about all things music related and meeting interesting people from our local community, you're in the right place. Welcome to Secrets from the Scene. My name is Stephen Helvig, and I'm your host. Thank you so much for joining us and tuning in today. Today's episode is with local artist Brandyn Tulloch. He's a reggae artist, spoken word poet, multidisciplinary artist in general, an activist, a lot of interesting sides, and I'm excited to get to know him more, but we're also going to be talking about today's sort of theme of the episode is what to do if you're in a really small niche, if your genre is not mainstream. Given that Brandyn's background in music is in reggae and spoken word, those are two things that don't necessarily scream major pop appeal, although they do have large audiences globally, for sure. But if you're just starting out, and especially if you're in a scene like the Twin Cities where there isn't going to be a large built-in audience for these two things, how do you manage? And I think a lot of people can relate. Even if your genre isn't one of those things, a lot of people feel like they might be doing something that's slightly different from what feels mainstream or what's really popular. It can feel like that your thing doesn't have a large audience or feels in its own corner. So how do you get a community around that? Well, Brandyn's been great at doing community building things, and we're going to dive into all of that today about how he's got into these things in the first place, how he's built an audience, and how he continues to build community around himself and around others. Please welcome today's guest, Brandyn Tulloch.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was a very cool opportunity. I remember following you guys on Instagram like a little while back, and then got a phone call from Chadwick Niles, and was kind of talking about some other things. And then he's like, "Oh, by the way, are you free this day to get on this podcast?" He's like, "Have you heard of them?" I was like, "I think let me get on Instagram. I know yeah. No, definitely have heard of them. I've seen some of their stuff, and that would be like a very, very cool opportunity. So thank you so much for having me. Thanks for the stars aligning to make this all work out, and for having me in today. So thank you.
Of course. I'm excited to talk a little bit about your perspective on this concept of like building your career, building your path when it's in a small niche like reggae or spoken word. Now you started first with just spoken word. That's sort of where you got your start as an artist, let's say.
Yeah. So since I was a kid, right, I would always turn to writing. When I was a sad little boy, didn't have anyone to talk to, life was lifing and, going through things, and, other people have different outlets. Other people like talk to other people. Me, sometimes it was just me and my notes app on my phone, or, a little journal here or there. It was always my outlet creatively to kind of get me through some of like the harder points in life. So that started early on as like middle school, high school. Some of the things I would write, whether they were more so just journal entries, some of them would sort of turn into poems. Some of them would turn more into like songs. Not that I was like a practicing musician or anything like that at that time, but always loved music. And, I remember having, what was it, like in math class, right? We had when we were learning the quadratic formula. Right, a lot of people learn it to like different melodies and different like nursery rhymes or whatever. We had to come up with our own. And I think I made like a Lady Gaga remix to like Bad Romance, but with the quadratic formula. And everyone was like, "What?" And I was like, "Hey, the syllables worked." Like it all matched up. Like writing a song was never something that was hard for me. I could do it. Sure. Was it good or not? I don't know, but I could do it. And so there were times where, just as an outlet, I used to write poems for girls that I liked, stuff like that. I don't do that. I don't do that too much anymore. It didn't go the way I wanted it to back then. But, always like writing was always like my main form of creative outlet. And come to 2020, being, Black in the United States, but also being in Minnesota while you are witnessing you witnessed the murder of George Floyd, May 25th, 2020, but then also the uprising that followed that with all of the protests here and throughout the country and throughout the world, when we're in like a new second wave of civil rights movement right here in our own backyard, you know, being so close to it. I feel like everyone around here had to say something or do something or felt compelled to say or do something. For me, I just started like showing up physically, going to, you know, protests and actions here and there. And I never really said much, but that didn't mean I didn't have much to say. I just didn't really know how to say it. And so I started writing it down. And then I can't remember what exactly events were happening or whatever, but kind of like turned into more of like an open mic / like arts showcase type of things where like, here's like a microphone if you have something to say, if you have something to perform or whatever. I never really wanted to be the guy that was like going to go up there and rap about what was going on. I was like, there was plenty of that going on, and, you know, no shade to nobody. A lot of that was like good stuff, but I didn't feel like, who wants to hear that from me? I don't know. But I do have so much that I want to say, so I'm just going to go up and say it, right? And so I would, you know, pull out my phone and read what I had written, and that's essentially what spoken word poetry like is, because there was, you know, definitely some rhyming here and there, some different alliteration and different writing techniques and stuff like that. You know, that was summer of 2020, and basically after that and doing that more and more, people started, you know, offering me like microphones, like, hey, we're having this event, can you come and do some spoken word for it? Or I've met so many families from Minnesota who have had, you know, loved ones that have been lost to police brutality, that have been taken from police brutality or community violence or things like that. Like, you know, I've met the family of Philando Castile. I've met the family of Dante Wright. I've met the family of Winston Smith, of Dolal Eid. There's so many people in the state primarily that have lost their loved ones to, whether it's police violence, community violence. And, you know, they would ask me like, oh, could you write something or just perform something? You don't even have to write anything new, but just perform something. And so that's like a lot of what I was doing 2020, 2021 into, you know, 2022 even. That was mainly like what my focus was, you know, Black liberation and liberation focused, and just being there for community, for a grieving community, because we were all grieving. It was COVID, it was the uprising, it was so much going on that's like all we had was each other, because we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know what the status of the world was going to be. We didn't know if we were going to be able to go outside next week. Like, who knows what's going on? But we had each other, we had community, and I had art, I had my writing as kind of like my way that could make it all make sense to me. And doing different things like that, I got some pretty cool opportunities. 2021, that was the 1 year anniversary of George Floyd's murder, and BET was in town doing like a documentary series, and they were looking for different artists from different regions. So they were in Minnesota. I think they were in a couple different places, like maybe Chicago, I think maybe Atlanta, a couple different places. And the director was just looking for artists, and then my name got brought up. And I remember it was kind of like a last minute thing. I was at work and I get a text from someone's like, hey, what are you doing like this evening, like in a couple of hours? Can you perform for this BET documentary? I was like, absolutely I can. Like, yes, I can do that. And so I was in a feature. It is called Bars and Ballads, Words for George Floyd. And it came out on May 25th, 2021. I believe. And it was, you know, me doing spoken word. And it was really cool to see myself on like a, you know, a nationally broadcasted thing. But that's never really like the goal of the art. It's just to get the words out there, to get the art out there. But to know that it was well received enough to be given that opportunity was really cool, you know. And then that was 2021, still doing more performing, started like going to more open mics and more just like art focused spaces as opposed to like protest-focused spaces. So like different open mics, different poetry slams, right, where there's people of all backgrounds talking about all types of things. And that was cool, getting to meet other poets, because I was never like really like a formally trained poet or formally trained writer. I just kind of was like, hey, it's kind of what I do, and it kind of fits into this. So let me see how y'all do things and learn from y'all and hear what y'all got to say. And it was really cool. Met some of, you know, some close friends who I'm still very close with, met some artists who I continue to work with to this day. I felt like the next thing for me was like, okay, I have all of these pieces of writing. What do poets do? They put out like, you know, poetry books, things like that. So I ended up putting out a poetry book. Well, I actually put out two in 1 year. I think it was 2022, 2023. I forget whenever that was, put out my first book, and a lot of people assumed that it was going to be a book like all about like liberation and all those poems that I did for the movement. But I kind of like took it upon myself. It was for my 25th birthday. I put out a book of poetry titled I'm an Artist. And it was kind of me accepting that I'm not just someone who like likes art or appreciates art or enjoys, you know, performing or writing. Like I am an artist. Like it's who I am. It's kind of me claiming that identity that I don't know if I'm a poet. I don't know if I'm a musician. I don't know if I'm a singer. I don't know if I'm whatever, but I know I'm an artist, right? Like that title for sure. I can claim that and I can own that. And so that book was collections of, you know, writing that I have had for the past 10 years. You know, I was looking at my notes app on my phone and I was like,
Sure.
Dang, I wrote this literally 10 years ago. And it was, you know, whether they were full poems written out or whether they were just short little like sentences that were like kind of creative and, you know, had metaphors and whatever. And so I, you know, put them into a collection of poems, kind of like chaptered. I think there was like 4 chapters, kind of like based off of love, based off of life, based off of loneliness, and then based off of my relationship with being an artist. Because like as you grow and as you learn, especially when you're doing, you know, some work that feels very heavy, feels very personal, but it's also like, you know, I got to the point where my art and my writing had done what it had needed to do for me. I've been holding on to these for like 10 years. Maybe I can give them to the world and see if the world can use them, you know? And it was a really cool kind of like experience of like, okay, I'm gonna actually like put this work out there and whoever likes it, whoever doesn't, that's fine. But like, you know, I sold like over 200 copies of that first book that I had put out. And like, I didn't really ask people to buy it too much. I posted it on my 25th birthday and then, you know, maybe a couple times after that. But then come like the end of the year, I saw how many copies I sold and I was like, oh, like people actually like, you know,
Sure.
It was an interesting and encouraging thing to be like, oh, like people, this is like what support feels like, you know? And then that was in February, and then July of that year, I put out the book that people would assume that I would have put out. The first piece of writing that I wrote after George Floyd was murdered was titled Land of the Free, Home of the Brave. And that's what I titled that book. It was just all of the pieces of writing that I did around that time and for other family members and for these different events, like kind of all, you know, centered around the idea of like liberation as a whole, not just Black liberation, but liberation of all oppressed people from all of the oppressive systems, both locally, globally, you know, within different classes, within different, you know, groups. You know, I'm trying to show solidarity with all people, all oppressed people. When we are all free, that's when we can truly be free. So put out my second book in that July. And then, you know, I think it was the following year. Yeah. So that was my 25th birthday when I put out the first book. Come my 26th birthday, you know, the little inner musician in me had kind of been like, bro, you got these microphones, you got these stages that you're on, like, bro, put on an instrumental, put on some music with it and like actually like perform, you know, you want to sing a little bit, you want to dance a little bit, like, you know, you've always loved music. So like, why not find a way to like incorporate music into what you're doing? So I think it was my 26th birthday. I had this show that I titled Poetic Roots, and I got me and 2 of my poet friends, Jandel Thuray and Miss Mari, kind of to like introduce people to me as like a musician. I just did like some covers of songs. So if we rewind a little bit, during the Uprising 2020, 2021, a lot of what I was seeing and experiencing, you know, I was trying to like rationalize it, conceptualize it, trying to like not drive myself crazy. And one of the things that was able to kind of like ground me was reggae music. You know, if you really listen to like the themes and the words that they're saying, I go and see buildings burning down in Minneapolis and stuff like that. And then I go and turn on a Bob Marley album, and he has a song called Burning and Looting. And that song talks about, you know, being faced with oppression and these oppressive systems and, you know, waking up in a curfew and all of this stuff. And we were literally in lockdown. We literally weren't supposed to be out past whatever time. And like, they're literally singing about the same things. And that was from the 70s, you know, and here we are in 2020, literally experienced the same things that he was talking about. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. And then, you know, I'm going through like his whole discography, listening to all of his albums. And I'm like, there's literally so many parallels between what he's saying and what we are living that like, it just makes so much sense to historically, but also with what reggae is as a genre to why there would be overlap between like the work that I've done and the creative things that I've done and, you know, moving into a reggae type of space, a musical, you know, style. So the 26th birthday, we did like covers of like some Bob Marley songs, but then added our own poetry, like as an intro or outro or as like a little interlude. And, you know, it was a nice small show in like a basement. And like, it was just really cool. It felt, again, like what I was supposed to be doing, you know. Fast forward from there, I just kept trying to find ways to kind of reintroduce myself as like, I'm not just, you know, a poet or whatever. Like I'm more than just like one thing. I'm an artist, but like I'm, like you said, multidisciplinary. So I started, you know, putting out some of the videos from that evening, or I would like put out like little demos to like reggae songs. Like I would just be on YouTube finding like old reggae instrumentals and things like that. I think one of the coolest things about reggae is like the instrumentals or the rhythms. There could be 20 people that hop on the same instrumental. And that's just like the culture of it, right? Like it's not like ripping people off. It's not anything like that. There are like 8 versions of your favorite reggae song, yes. Right? All done by so many people, and they all do it like their own way. And there's like just an appreciation. I feel like that's how people show their appreciation for the greats and you know, the musicians that came before them. And so like I'm just finding all these like old roots reggae instrumentals. I'm like, man, I could write something to that. And so I would. And so I would like put out little demos here and there. For me, it was always, you know, reggae is kind of the foundation of what I'm doing, just because of like the things that I'm talking about. It makes sense for it to be, you know, over reggae instrumentals and rhythms and stuff like that. But then also, I'm just such a fan of music from like the late 70s, early 80s. Like from 1975 to 1985, the music that was coming out during that time period is insane. Like it's crazy to think about how you had, you know, Bob Marley creating some of his best creations. You had Stevie Wonder creating some of his best creations. You had Michael Jackson creating some of his best creations. Prince started like there was so much music from that time period that to this day like still stands the test of time.
Yeah.
You know? And
I'm gonna hop in here quick.
Sorry. Yep. Go ahead.
I don't mean to interrupt, but you're like covering your entire life story, and I need to break it up a little bit just to because I got some questions along the way here. So you start off in spoken word, and it starts super, super organic. It comes out of a place of like, I need to get some things off my chest, and the community's hurting, and these are things that we can share together. It sounds like the majority of maybe even like for a year or so is all pretty much private events. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it was like not necessarily private, but it was like
not like a concert that you go to or a show you go to pay tickets to. That's
correct.
What I mean. Yeah, like they may be open to the public, a public gathering or something, but it's not your traditional show, right? And so it's just very organic. It's just being in the community, showing up, seeing an opportunity of like, you know, I have something to say. That then leads you to getting a great but rare opportunity to do this BET feature, which is amazing. And then I have to imagine there was some like momentum from that, right? Of everybody going, this was really cool. Obviously in town, but then just nationally. I guess a quick question on that specifically, what happened in terms of like following and things like that after that aired?
Yeah, it was, you know, it was kind of like a weird, like, is this like really happening? Like, is this really me? That's really me, like, you know, on TV. And like, you know, I tried not to set too many expectations on like, okay, what's going to happen? Like from this, it was very cool to see. And it was very cool, the response that it got. I think all it did was like solidify that like, oh, like, you know, he's really like a poet who takes his craft seriously.
Okay. Well, of course. Yeah.
and I can't say if like, you know, I was given plenty more opportunities because I was in that. I think it was more so that like around town, like people were like, okay, like we definitely see him. I think there were some other shows and things like that. I say shows, but I mean like events, you know, where people asked me to speak at, you know, whether it was at, you know, the U of M or for different like film screenings, like, hey, we have this film about the student to prison pipeline, school to prison pipeline. Can you like write something about that? And we'll have you perform at our film premiere and things like that. And that was kind of like, I was, you know, known as like one of the the poets of like the movement, where if there was an event or if there was something like centered around Black liberation, I would be, given an opportunity to then be a part of that, which, helped to let people know who I was. But also at the same time, I was like, I am very much like a poet at this point, but like that's not all of who I am,
Sure.
So it's kind of like that dual, like, yes, like this is a very cool thing, but like that's not all of me. I think I had mentioned this when we were speaking earlier. It's like people who knew me at that time, they're like, oh, he's a very good poet, right? Everyone knows him as a poet. But like people who know me now don't even know that I was a poet then. It's like I've lived like many different lives, and it was just like a time period of who I was in that specific time. And, I still am that, but definitely have gone like a slightly different route now.
So you have the BET feature that leads to some more opportunities. It definitely leads to more awareness, which is what the opportunities are coming from. And then you put out your first book, you put out your second book, and eventually start saying, I need to pivot into music. You feel drawn to that, right? It resonates with you. You have a connection with old reggae or original reggae, right? And get deeper into that. Now, your dad's an immigrant from Jamaica, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So did you grow up listening to reggae then?
So my father was born in 1962, and then he came to the U.S. in the 1970s. So he was still pretty young when, Bob and Peter Tosh and, Inner Circle and all of those guys were like really taking off. What he listened to was like Yellow Man and like the original like dance hall stuff. So I remember hearing some old dance hall stuff from like the 1980s. That's what I remember hearing when I was a kid.
Which is pretty different from roots reggae. Yeah.
Yes. It has, some of the themes can be, depending on who you're listening to.
Yep.
Yellow Man, not so much. He was definitely, kind of talking his talk, almost like a precursor to rap.
Absolutely.
How the evolution of the Jamaican influence on, hip hop and rap. But kind of like as I was getting into is like my father was also like a big fan of like the funkier, groovier stuff, the Ohio Players, Parliament Funkadelic, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of what I heard as well growing up in my house. That's what my dad would play when we all got to clean the house today.
Yeah.
So those were definitely like my biggest like musical inspirations, because the older, funkier, groovier, soul type stuff from what I heard when my father was playing it. But then come to 2020, when I'm trying to like rationalize what the life that we're currently living, I was finding my own roots through music that, it's not like I heard it when I was a kid and I've listened to this my whole life, but like, it was resonating so much with the life I was currently living.
Right.
So it was like those two combinations have kind of landed me to where I am now.
So you link up with some other poets, you start playing around, you feel somewhat invited by this rhythm culture, which, as you mentioned, and just to reiterate to people, that there'll be an instrumental, and then everybody does their own song over this instrumental. The instrumental doesn't change, but the top line does. And I always found that super cool. So you could get a mixtape where it would just be the same rhythm over and over again, and then like 10 to 20 songs over, that would just keep happening. And it was actually really creative. In some ways that exists, but you don't necessarily find it today among other genres because of how beat making works now with, sites like BeatStars and things like that. There are people making their own versions of the same one, but they just don't hear them. But I kind of feel like that could come back. That would be kind of interesting. There's one of the reasons it doesn't is because of copyright law, of course. It makes it very difficult, but it wasn't about that for people that were doing these. It was just, these were put out. They're just like mixtapes. So you get called, you feel invited, like, hey, I can do my version of it. And so you start using these instrumentals, and then bam, you're finding your way back into music. So you've got a start. I imagine you got a bit of a following and stuff online from the BET thing and just from being in the community and the spoken word thing. When you decide, hey, I'm going to start doing music, and you get to the point where you're ready to do a live show, what'd that look like? How did you go about finding that? Because there's only a few places that even really do reggae in the Twin Cities.
Yeah, so for me, that show that I did where I titled it Poetic Roots was like a show for my birthday, because it was kind of, me showing the roots music side, but also paying homage to me as a poet. So adding the music with the poetry. And then fast forward a year, I'm like, man, I should just go all in and get like a group of musicians together to play like some music. and that was for my following birthday. So that would have been my 27th birthday at that point. I've found that if you do things on your birthday, I guess artistically, it gives people a reason to want to come and support you a little bit more, because like
It twists the arm. Of your
exactly,
friends and
you know,
family,
like
yeah.
people you haven't spoken to in years will hit you up, hey, happy birthday. And then when I put out my first book, you know, people say happy birthday. I was like, thank you. By the way, I just put this out if you want to, you know,
It's not a
check
bad idea.
it out,
It's
you
not
know,
a
stuff
bad
like
idea.
that. Every year I have found that like on your birthday is like a day people will be much more willing to support you than on a random Saturday, like in the middle of whatever. So just a little tip out there. If you're ever looking for a little cheat code, a little extra little something, a little push, just put something out on your birthday. People will mess with it a little bit more. But so yeah, fast forward, I'm thinking of like, who have I met? I met so many people from 2020 to 2023 at that point, from so many different avenues. I met, so Salora the Essence is her stage name. I met her through a poetry thing. There was a Black History Month event that happened at like McAllister College, and a guy by the name of Desmond, he's like a jazz artist from New York, but he was studying at McAllister. Got a bunch of people together. He hit me up, hey, do you want to just do some poetry while we're just kind of, you know, doing some random jazz behind you? I was like, yeah, cool. And then I went up there, did some poetry. I came down, and then her name's Charmaine. Salora the Essence went up, and she did her thing while they're doing like jazz, and she was singing. You know, she was like 20, like 19, 20 at the time, and she like starts scatting and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, this girl got something different. Like that doesn't just like happen, right? And then, so I met her. I met the drummer who they had playing that day. He's from Trinidad and Tobago. I didn't know him. I didn't know anything about him, but turns out he's from the Caribbean. And so, you know, I messaged her about like maybe doing music together one day. I messaged him on Instagram about like, hey, so the drummer, his name is Colin Mitchell, goes by the name Rottweiler. And he's in so many groups, and like he plays a bunch of different styles.
So
of
that
music.
unlocked a whole nother aspect of community and people that you could tap into. Yeah.
And so like I messaged him like, hey, I know you're busy, you're booked and busy, but like I also know you're from the Caribbean. I'm trying to do like some little reggae, like typo, whatever. He was like, oh, absolutely. And I was like, man, I did not expect it to go, because like, you know, who am I on the music scene at this point? Like nobody, right? I had yet to really like venture out that much. But you know, after I met them, met some other people, and then we just kind of started playing. We got together, started doing like a little bit of different stuff. They, you know, some of them have like more of a jazzier type of background, a neo soul type of background. So we would just kind of like play, see what comes from it. But like me as like a writer, I have like these song ideas that like, okay, we're gonna kind of like do this. And, you know, I had my first show that I had to, you know, I was trying to find a venue, like you said, that would like, you know, be opening to a reggae group or whatever. Couldn't find one. So what I had to do was like rent out a venue that's typically for like weddings. I had to rent it out. I had to like hire people to come and do sound and like just build a stage from the ground up, because there wasn't a space for us. And we did that. We started playing like a couple different shows, meeting more people. And then come time, I was like, what are we going to name this project of musicians kind of doing like some reggae stuff and, you know, some like tapping into some soul, tapping into some funk, tapping into some other stuff. And then I was like, I feel like it makes sense for me to just call it Poetic Roots, because it was almost poetic how I met all of these individuals that I now play music with.
Yeah.
You know, just through doing community work, just through being out and about. And now I've met all of these people, and we just like work together so perfectly. And so that has been like my band that I've been playing with for, you know, a year and a half now. And we've done plenty of different shows, on plenty of different stages.
Yeah, I love it. And it's such a great example of what to do if you need to build it from the ground up. And it starts with, like, you've said yes to so many different things. Like, you had the spoken word thing that you just, all right, let's, you know, you're doing all kinds of events. You're doing personal things. You're showing up at public events. You'll get asked to do random poetry while there's a jazz band playing at Black History Month at a college, to a film screening, to whatever, like just showing up. And I'm sure some of those audiences were tiny. Some of them were bigger. You know, you don't know what you're getting into, but you're showing up, and then you're connecting with people. You're meeting people. And then beyond that, you're following up with people and making connections with them online, so that they're, you know, I'm sure there was we're hearing the highlights, right, of everything that went well and went into the next thing. But I'm sure there were plenty of connections that didn't lead anywhere, you know, and that's something that people need to remember because this can feel daunting, right? When you recap it, it all seems like a straight line. And it's not that way at all, right? You don't even necessarily know where it's leading. It's just, well, let's just do this and see what happens. And I think that's an important thing for people to take away, that you just have to show up. Maybe you don't know this, but just guessing wise, during the, let's just say from 2020, where things really start to kick off and you're showing up in the community, sometimes performing and sometimes not, right? To the time that the band gets started, which was early 2024, right? How often were you going out to events, like just on average?
When it came to from 2020 to 2022, right? We'll call that like during the uprising that happened. The day that I had the video shoot for the BET documentary, I literally had gone to a protest. I think it was, I forget what the exact number of days. I think it was like 16 days straight, something like that. Because that was around the time where we're going to the trial for Derek Chauvin, the police officer who murdered George Floyd. And, you know, the trial is happening, but then Daunte Wright was murdered in Brooklyn Center by Kim Potter. That was the accidental taser, but she pulled the gun and killed Daunte Wright April 11th of 2021. And so like we go from one protest up to Brooklyn Center, and then we're in Brooklyn Center like every day. And it was just so much going on. I remember going like I said, 16 days straight of like going to going to work, going to a protest, going to bed, go to work, go to protest, go to bed. On one of those last days, I got the call to go to the BET thing, and I did. And I watched the video back, and like my eyes are just like glossed over. Like I got bags under my eyes. It's like I'm looking at a zombie, you know. Like it was kind of like you're in autopilot. You're just in survival mode. So when we're talking like those type of events, it was multiple. It was
obviously
nonstop.
there was periods that were very, very dense.
And then when we move, a couple years, 2023, 2024, that was kind of when I made more of the transition into like going to like artist spaces.
Correct.
Going to like the open mics, going to the.
And when you did those, how often were you trying to get to them?
It was probably like any Thursday, Friday, or Saturday that they had one, I was gonna go pull up to it, because you just never know.
Exactly, and
you just never know.
That in and of itself deserves a moment, because a lot of I get asked by younger people all the time of like, I don't know where to start, like I don't know anybody, blah blah blah, and it's like, well, have you gone out to anything? You have to show up. You have to be willing to show up. Some of those nights you're gonna meet a ton of people that matter, and some of those nights you're not.
Yep.
You seem fairly sociable. I don't know if you consider yourself an extrovert or whatever, but there are introverts. So what do you recommend for people that do feel a little bit more shy, a little more hesitant about showing up at these events? Because you've been to plenty of them at this point.
I think for me, I'm like an extroverted introvert. Like I have my social battery does like this, it's
sure.
It's a little bit of malfunctioning sometimes. No matter how much I try to charge it, I'll go out and I'm like, I do not want to be outside, right? I want to be at my house. I really am a homebody at heart, but opportunities don't come at home. You got to get out the house to go, hopefully make some opportunities. But I would say that just showing up, being in the space, you don't have to get on a mic. You don't have to put your name down on any lists, but just like being there gets you around the people that can help you down the line. A lot of people have the idea that you have to be like best friends with all of these artists or all these community members.
Yeah.
You really don't. You can just be in community with people. That does not mean that they have to be your best friend. You don't have to talk every day. You can see them when you see them. And that's what community is, right? Because now when you go to another thing and you see them there, then you can say, oh, hey, good to see you again. And, a couple weeks later, oh, hey, how you been? You been to anything else? And then, they go, oh, there's this new spot over here where they're doing this and this is super cool. And, you just keep meeting more and more people and your network gets bigger. And, it can just be a network thing. It can just be a community thing. Sometimes they do become your new best friends. And that's all about just going where you feel you're called to go. If you're an artist, you're a poet, and you're like, man, I really want to like, take my poetry more seriously. Well, go to the open mics, go to the poetry shows, go support other poets who are having their own shows. Maybe you're not even allowed to get on the mic that night, but just being there and seeing how they're doing things, like the first poetry slam that I did was my friend Jandel Thuray, super amazing poet. That was when like I first met her, and then I found out that she had put out a poetry book. I literally like messaged her out of the blue, like, hey, I saw you did this book. Like, how did you do that? And if I hadn't gone to some of these shows, if I hadn't gone to some of these spaces, who knows if I would have even been inspired to take that route or do those things. So it's like, you just got to take that little leap of faith to not even believe like, okay, I got to go out there and make a name for myself. Just go out there and be present. And whatever comes from that more things can come from that than not, Yeah. So that would be my advice, is to just go out there and put yourself out there, be present in those spaces and make community.
Yeah. Be willing to build. Take your time. It's one thing before the next, it's not all going to happen at once. And even for you, as you get the music going, you decide, I want to do this, but I don't necessarily have a venue yet. And so renting out a venue, and again, asking people that you've had connections with, that you have a little bit of a, friendship, like, hey, can we do this? Would you be willing to help me with this? And pulling that together. And I'm sure there was, most people starting at the beginning have very little budget. You're trying to pull it all together, right? What was your process, of promoting that first show? Was it all just sort of friends and family and hoping for that, or did you do more beyond that?
Yeah, it was mainly just friends and family, because it was, again, going to happen on my birthday. So I was like, come celebrate me, But then once it's no longer like just you, because I got, some other musicians, like they would promote it too and stuff like that. It was just, like I said, I've made connections with other people. I had some friends. We talked about this group earlier in our conversation, Ozone Creations. I had them be a part of it, because I've learned if there's people that you like, try to get to know them, try to be in community with them, because like y'all can help each other out. If you see people that you're like similar to, even if you are, in a slightly different lane, just kind of like being around people that are either in a place where you wish to go, or you feel like could help you get to some other place, It's very cool to create with like-minded people. And so I had them be a part of that show and stuff like that. It was a decent turnout, and you always, as an artist, there's so much insecurity that comes with being an artist. And, everyone always wants to like knock it out of the park. And, this thing just went viral and now I'm good. Now I'm set for life. But, I had this show and it was sold out and whatever. That's not the reality most of the time. But you can't be upset if only 50 people came and you hope that it was going to be 100. That's 50 people. Like, how many people would love to have an audience of 50 people? And you got to start wherever you're going to start. I think it ended up being, 50 to 75 people that came out to the thing, and like it was cool. And then, like you said, it was a budget that I had to, get together. I was working full time, so I could use my money to support the art and stuff like that. But, then you giving other people opportunities or putting on these shows, and now people see that you're like serious about this kind of thing. So then you get asked to open for a different group at a different time, and you're like, oh, like that's cool. Had I not done that show, right, I would not have gotten this opportunity. So, and then after you get that one opportunity, it leads to like even more down the line. And then, a year later, you're doing festivals and stuff like that. And it's like just putting yourself out there, taking that leap of faith is kind of what it takes.
Yeah. Yeah. One other thing I want to get into is how you think about putting together events. Because you've just this last summer, earlier this summer, you did one day festival at the Ice House. And when you're curating these things and you're putting people together, okay, you're in a reggae band. A lot of people would think I need to find other people that do reggae, but you go beyond that. You've kind of put together a wider swath of music that's tied together by a different thread. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So for me, it's always been about like, how can I help put people on that like I also believe in? Being in community with so many talented people, there's plenty of groups that I'm just a fan of. There's plenty of artists that I'm just a fan of. But also, the local scene is the local scene, and there's so many bands that like have similar members, or, you know, one drummer plays in 5 different groups. You know, there's a guitar player that plays in 5 different groups and stuff like that. We're all so connected, even though we do have different lanes. And I think for me personally, you know, I think we are in Minnesota, we're in the Twin Cities, but there is a beautiful music scene here. And then even, you know, looking more in a smaller lens than that, there's a beautiful like black music scene here of young black musicians that are so talented and are all kind of doing like their own thing. So I think it would be, you know, a disservice to only highlight this one genre or this one lane when there's so many lanes that people are choosing to take. I know we were talking about like having like a niche and things like that. I think people who are doing these things like authentically, if they are choosing to do something different, but you can tell that like that is like who they really are and that is what they're really like supposed to be doing. You can just feel it, the way that they're performing. Like they're not putting on a show. That is like them. Even if they do have like a different stage presence or whatever, that's still them. And it's so cool to highlight all of these different groups. And then on top of that, a lot of these different groups have similar members and stuff like that. So when I did curate that lineup for the Rootstock Music Festival is what I called it, I created like a list in my notes app of like, how many bands do I know? How many like groups can I think of? How many acts can I think of? And it was a really long list. And I was like, okay, what makes the most sense logistically and what makes the most sense in like a sonic perspective as well as like,
Right.
Like you said, it doesn't all have to be reggae, but like, okay, this person's going to do like a little bit more pop. This person's going to do a little bit more alternative. This person's going to do a little bit more jazz. This person's doing like a little bit more soul. This person's going to do a little bit more like Afro. This person's going to do a little bit more stuff like that, because there is such a wide variety of what's happening that I think it is beautiful to show a little bit of all of it. And, you know, I think come next summer, I think Rootstock 2 will happen. We're still talking about getting a date set and everything like that, but there's still so many more acts and so many more artists from that first list that I had thought of that we still got to highlight all of them. I just think it's like an appreciation for all the different things that are happening, because like there really is no singular culture within Minneapolis in the music scene or anything like that. There's so much if you really want to like look into it.
Right. You don't have to limit yourself. I think a lot of people think that, oh, we should put this together or it's, you know, all in this general style. But that's not necessarily a limitation. Mm-hmm. Sometimes a show like that can be a good idea. Don't get me wrong. But if you find yourself of like, well, I'm doing this thing and I don't know how to like match with other artists, think a little bit bigger than just genre. Mm-hmm. You know, think about the community that supports these things, because just like musicians play in multiple different bands of different styles, people listen to all kinds of different music, mm-hmm. right? And so I think that you have to think about like, well, who can you actually get? Who's in your network? You know, that might be the place where you start. But then you also think about what would be an enjoyable concert experience from the listener's perspective, and getting a nice variety of things. Now, I think that there's probably some line where it's like, this is just weird. Yeah. There's too much variety here. But there's more than one way to tie a good show together besides just genre. You know, there can be other overarching themes that people will support for the sake of the theme, not the sake of the music. You know, maybe it's the poetic side of it, of like, maybe all of these artists have some sort of activist quality and people will go to the show because they're interested in the message. Mm-hmm. You know, coming up, there's the On One Festival, which is all Black artists, mm-hmm. right? And there are going to be people that go for the music, and there's going to be people that go for just the idea of the festival, right? And so if you find yourself feeling limited by genre, think bigger.
Yeah, most definitely. I think, you know, as someone who does reggae music, which is like, again, a very niche thing, I feel like everybody likes reggae music to an extent, you know, like,
yeah, there's not a lot of people that are going to be like, I don't like Bob Marley.
Yeah. Oh, I hate this turn off. No, that's not how people react to it. I can't say that, you know, 95% of the people out there probably aren't turning on reggae in their car when they're driving to work in the morning. That's not on their morning playlist. That's fine. But if you hear it live, you're not going to dislike it, you know? And I think that's something that a lot of people can learn is like, yeah, you may be doing something that's a little different, but if you're doing it authentically and passionately, I think that's what people can appreciate even more. Like, I've been to plenty of shows where I'm like, man, he's up there having a good time. He obviously loves what he's doing. The music's not for me, but I really respect them artistically that they're doing what you can see that that's what they love and that's who they are. And that is, you know, so I think as an artist, if you are doing what you feel called to do, I don't think no one could ever knock you for that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So once you got through putting together your own show, did you have success then connecting with any other reggae bands? Have you gotten to that point where you are thinking about that, or are you kind of sticking with it just being a variety of stuff?
So I've been a big fan of the International Reggae All-Stars.
Legends.
They've been doing the thing for like over 20 years now in the Twin Cities.
And if you don't know them, they play at Bunkers every week,
every Tuesday night at Bunkers, and then they're like at so many different festivals and shows and stuff like that. If you're hearing reggae music in the Twin Cities, it's a good chance it might be them. It's probably the International Reggae All-Stars, or there's also Innocent, Singing Tony, a couple other guys.
Yeah.
But I would love to. I think that is, you know, coming up on some like the next stages of like, okay, they have like a pretty good following too. The International Reggae All-Stars do, where like when I go to their shows, I see like the same aunties and same people at the shows every time, because if that's what someone truly loves, where else can they hear that than, you know, wherever they're playing? And I think it doesn't have to be like a passing of the torch kind of thing, right? Like I'm not saying like, oh, I'm here, like you should all.
Yeah, of course not.
Never that. I think it's more so that like I have a very big appreciation for what they're doing and how they've continued to do it for 20 plus years. I would love to. That's like one of my short-term goals within the next year or so. We'll see when it works out, to like, I would love to open for them, you know? Yeah. I just want to show like a little bit different, because, you know, they do like a lot of lovers rock and stuff like that. And I do have an appreciation for all of that. And then, you know, I think some of what me and my group does is like just a little bit different of a direction from that, you know, like bands like Inner Circle or Third World or stuff, like they were really tapping into like other genres. Like Third World has a cover of Now That We Found Love. And it's like a totally like this funky, like reggae, like culmination of so many different things. And like, you know, I feel like that's what we can offer with Poetic Roots. And even the idea of Poetic Roots as a group, sometimes we have different members who can't make it to shows and whatever. So we're like, Poetic Roots is more of like an idea. And like, I've had so many different people that have come and just played for us for one show. And it's like, bro, you're part of the family. Like, if you're ever free and we got a show, you could probably just come jam with us. Because a lot of people that aren't familiar with reggae music, like, you know, when they're doing their rehearsals and other groups and whatever, it's like, all right, we got this formula, we got to hit all these notes and like this. When we play, it's really just a jam session. Like we have the structure of the song, but I might say, hey, take a solo. Hey, do this. Every time we play the music, it's a little bit different. And that's one thing that I love about it, is just so fun, free flowing and stuff like that. So
yeah. Well, one of the nice things too about being in, while there are limitations to having a smaller niche, the connections you can make are that much stronger. Like you brought up with the International Reggae All-Stars, with the same people who are coming back because they can't find it anywhere else. There can be a power to picking a niche and doubling down and not trying to expand on it, because there's less competition, right? There can be a lot of power in being really specifically for someone, meaning that the opposite of that is when you put out music that you are kind of gearing towards everybody will like this. Sometimes it can be hard to get any attention or any traction to that. Whereas if you are really focused on like, I'm making it for my people, it's like, this is what they like, this is what we're going to do. And it might be a small group, but it'll be a powerful group. That can grow. Oh, yeah. There's an energy to that. And there can be, like you said, the authenticity factor of it, but then just the joy that comes with that, I think, and just feeling for the artist, but also for the audience, feeling like this is for me. This is so my thing. There's a lot of power to that. And I think there's a lot of building potential to that can take off. Whereas if no one feels a really true connection to it, it can be very good, but still not go anywhere.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I feel like we do have a lot of that in the Twin Cities, even if it's not reggae specifically. Like one act we were talking about earlier, Obi Original and the Black Atlantics. He's doing like a lot of, you know, West African, like high life, original, like Afrobeat type of stuff, which he's playing. He's in like a really good trajectory of where he's at, like in his music career, where he's playing like all these different festivals, and it's like crowds that have never in their life heard West African high life music, but their body is moving and they can't help it, right? Because the music just sounds so good. And if Obi weren't taking on that role, like it just wouldn't be done, And so I think, like you said, there's so much power in that, just taking it head on, like, no, this is what I'm going to do. And, it'll find who it's for, but also people can still enjoy it, even if it's not for them. And kind of like what I was saying, the whole authenticity part of it, like it'll just show people, like people will give an appreciation for it because it's just so real. Obi Original, the Black Atlantics, Fanaka Nation, he's a half Kenyan, half Lao, I believe. And, he does music from like both sides. Like he'll do a song and then he'll switch it up and do like, like an Asian like trap influence. I'm like, I don't know what is happening right now, but it's real cool. Like I'm not mad at this at all. Just to be able to dive into your own self and to display that for people. It's hard, it's challenging, and it maybe seems scary, but I think if that's what you're called to do, I think definitely do that.
I love it. You mentioned with Obi Original, the people maybe have never heard that West African inspired music. Well, it's not inspired music, West African music in his case. But, they still have a like physical reaction to it live. We also on the phone talked about people have asked you, like, you haven't done a lot of recording, right? But you'd said you're focusing more on the live thing. And I think that's a really interesting point. Ultimately, you had said, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but that you first want people to experience it. You want people to feel it and like live, because that's really the thing you're trying to get across more so than the recording of the song. Mm-hmm. I thought that's pretty interesting because that's, you can only hit so many people live versus with the recording, you get a lot more people. Mm-hmm. But I also don't disagree with the tactic at all, given that I am aware of how powerful reggae is. And that it is different feeling it live than listening to the recording. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about your thoughts on that, and then at what point you think it would be right to record.
Gotcha. Yeah. So for me, just kind of speaking of, doing things in like a very small niche, and, I had mentioned earlier what percentage of people that I know personally are turning on reggae when they, in their morning playlist to their commute to work. Probably not that many. But I know plenty of people that love going out and listening to live music, So I think the reaction that people will get is, I think reggae is a music that isn't meant to be perfect. It's not meant to be polished. And it's just like raw emotion, raw feeling, raw energy. And that is, it's very easy to convey on stage, Even if I look back at videos of a performance where I'm like, the performance itself was like perfect. Everyone in there was having a good time. And like, it was crazy. Like the feeling in there was like such high energy. Everyone was loving it. And then I watch a video back and I'm like, it sounds okay. Like, it just sounds okay, But like in that building, in that space, in that venue, everyone in there was having an amazing time. And I feel like the music that we're doing specifically is meant to be felt. And I think that might come also from my like poetry background, right? It's one thing for you to sit and read a poem, but it's a different thing for you to like hear me do spoken word.
I agree. And it's not the only genre. I mean, you can look at like the Grateful Dead having not that, I mean, they're still very successful, but their live shows obviously were far more successful than the recorded music was. And I think that's true. And there's crossover in even those crowds of what people will enjoy. But the live experience is its own thing. But at some point, you're going to have to record, right?
Yeah, I think in the more I've thought about it, the more, I've thought like to make it as authentic as possible would like, I'd have to do like almost like full band sessions or things like that to, keep some of that live feeling in there, but to also get it recorded and things like that. Because me personally, I'll listen to a lot of live albums like from the late 70s of like, Bob Marley at the Rainbow Theater, at the whatever, like those live sessions, even if they're, you know, at like the BBC studio and stuff like that, like those, again, I feel like the feeling is just a little bit more, you can like feel it a little bit more, even though the recording isn't polished. And, you know, I'm sure they went in and, you know, plugged in and patched in like a couple of different things to like, you know, fix any mistakes and things like that. But just that raw feeling of those live shows, like, to me, that's just what fuels me to like continue to want to like keep doing this. And it's also the whole social media aspect of like, I don't want to make a TikTok like, hey guys, did I just drop the song of the summer? and then, you know, put in like a little recording of whatever I just put out and stuff like that. Like, I feel like focusing on the live aspect of it will only help me when I do record and release music, as opposed to going like the other way around, which I feel like a lot of artists do, and they do have success doing that. You know, they record the music, they put it out, and then people are like, oh, when is your show? Like, let me come see you at the show. I don't know if I would have success doing it that way. I feel like for me, it just feels better to do it this way. Like, I've had people that have come to 3-4 shows now, and they're like, bro, when are you going to put that song out? When are you going to record it? I'm like, I don't even know. One of these days, eventually. But like, get people to really love the music. And then when it comes out, I'm sure they'll definitely tap in with it when it does. But I feel like artists nowadays are just having problems with the art versus the algorithm and all this stuff. And, you know, there really is no telling what'll work on social media and what won't. But I know, like, if you come and hear us live, you're going to like it. You're going to move a little bit. You're going to dance a little bit. Some of the songs might get stuck in your head just because that's what we do. And that's how I enjoy doing it.
So what's on the horizon? What are you working towards next?
So I got a couple shows lined up. The first one, I was talking about Obi Original and the Black Atlantics. We're opening for him August 15th. He's been having these couple different sessions called High Life Dance Parties. So the music's meant to, you know, be West African influence, but also tapping into different genres, stuff like that. So there'll be some reggae. I'm there, so there's going to be some reggae. And we're going to open for him. And that's Friday, August 15th at Hook and Ladder. And then on Saturday, August 16th, there is the On the One Music Festival. I will be a part of that. It is this big festival that's happening in Bloomington. It is highlighting all of the different avenues, the different lanes of Black musicians in the Twin Cities. There's going to be, you know, some soul, some jazz, some hip hop. There's going to be a little bit of reggae. That's what I'll be there for. And it's just going to be a celebration of Black music in Minnesota. There's going to be so many different genres that are highlighted because, like we were talking about earlier, we're not all doing the same thing. And there's so much beauty in the differences that we are creating, different genres that we are going into. There's so much beauty in all of it. So Chadwick Niles is doing a good job of highlighting all of those different avenues. And
yeah, who are some of the artists that are going to be playing?
I don't want to get them wrong off the top of my head.
Nerdy.
Yep. So Nerdy will be headlining. What does he always say? Your 7th favorite hip hop person. So we got the hip hop with Nerdy. We'll have, the Urban Collective. I think they're doing like, you know, a lot of hip hop, probably a cypher type of thing will be going on. We'll have Travion and Amani Waters, beautiful singers. Kennedy Watkins, one of the best voices in the city, amazing singer. We'll have Fanaka Nation, who does a little bit of Afro, a little bit of trap, a little bit of rap. We'll also have Soulflower, a little bit of alternative. None Above, who obviously has, you know, they open for Shaka Khan. Like, they have that, you know, 80s inspired type of sound to what they got going on.
A little bit of something for everybody.
Most definitely. If you enjoy live music, On the One Music Festival is the place to be, because you'll get a little bit of taste of everything, and you might even leave listening to or wanting to listen to music that you didn't even know you liked, because can definitely open your eyes to new flavors and new genres of what we got going on in the cities.
I love it, man. For people that want to follow you online, get to know more about you, where would you like to send people?
Yeah, so we've touched on it a little bit, multidisciplinary artists, but most of my stuff can be found on my Instagram. That's at @B_TULLOCH. Otherwise, I put my name, Brandyn Lee Tulloch, on like everything that I do, whether it's writing, whether it's photo and video, whether it's music. But yeah, if you find me on Instagram at B_Tulloch, that's where you can find most of my stuff, and I'll post whatever, social media is social media, but you can also find me outside. When I be at different events, when I'm, wherever, just come say what's up. It's always about making community. I love to be in community with as many creatives as I can, because we have power in numbers. We have power in creation. And I think, us creating together is the most powerful thing that we can do.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's clear how much community matters to you and how much you're contributing to it and making it better for everybody. Keep doing what you're doing. It is still early. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we have guests on that have been doing it for a decade or whatever, and like, I do like getting artists like yourself that have years of building towards this, but it's kind of still in the infancy in some ways. Like, you're still finding that path, and talking about the early stages of what that looks like, I think is really helpful for other people that are a few steps behind you still, and looking for like, what do I do next? Well, 100% get out and support other people. Go to the On the One Festival. Go check out the Hook and Ladder the Friday night before. Like, get to those things and just be there and learn and take it all in. There's so much to be gained. Now, before I let you go, there's one more thing I ask all artists, all guests that come on, which is if you'd like to share a secret, pass something along. I usually frame it as give a piece of advice that you maybe would have appreciated getting when you were just getting started out.
I think staying true to yourself and following whatever your heart is telling you to do will get you into everywhere you're supposed to go. If you would have told me 2 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, that I would be where I'm singing in a band, like I've hosted music festivals. I've been invited to music festivals to perform. Like, if you would have told me years ago I'd be featured on a documentary on BET, I wouldn't have believed you, because there were parts where there were times where I didn't even believe in myself, right? So as long as you believe in yourself and you enjoy what you're doing, I would just urge you to share it and live in that. Claim that you are an artist, claim that you are a creative, because you never know what doors that will open up for you. Just by being in spaces as a creative person amongst other creative people, you never know where you can go. You might end up on tour playing at the same show as Jimmy Cliff, like just by doing what you're doing and knowing who you're knowing. So
yeah, for anybody that is really confused about that reference. So we didn't really talk about it during the episode much because I wanted to focus more on you, but I have a background playing in a reggae band, which like very few people would know that about me. And so I was sharing that with Brandyn, and I'm sure came as a surprise. and had some pretty amazing opportunities playing around the country, doing some touring with some legendary stars. And all that came from just showing up and being true to the music that we were making, which was, not on the level of these guys by any means, but it was respected. And so we got some really cool opportunities, including playing a festival where Jimmy Cliff was playing and a lot of other cool things. But maybe that's for another podcast episode. We'll see. It was a long time ago. But Brandyn, this is cool. I really appreciate you, man. Good luck at the upcoming shows. Good luck with everything that you're doing. We didn't even get into some of the videography and photography that you're doing. But if you want to connect with Brandyn, I encourage you, hit him up and show up. Go to some shows. If you found this episode was helpful or inspiring, share it with somebody else that, might need it. And if you got a second, we always appreciate if you can subscribe on YouTube or leave a like on whatever podcast platform you're on, or a rating or a review or any of that stuff. It does help get it out to more people, and we just definitely appreciate it. Well, for everybody that listened, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.